Thank you so much, and welcome to the Governor's Council on Economic Expansion. This meeting is being held remotely due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Minnesota statutes section 13D.021 allow us to hold remote meetings during the pandemic because in-person meetings or meetings conducted under section 13D.02 are not practical or prudent because of a health pandemic or emergency declared under Chapter 12. And for all of us here today, I wanted to start our day by saying, first, welcome to 2022 and all it's going to bring to the state of Minnesota and has already. And I also wanted to take this opportunity as Commissioner of the Department of Human Services to introduce to you our newest Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Family Preservation, Ms. Bharti Wahi. Many of you heard at the end of 21 that Bharti had left the Children's Defense Fund. What we weren't yet free to tell you is that she's joining the Department of Human Services to lead our efforts across the state around family preservation. And of course, as 2022 luck would have it, she's one of the people who's not yet on this call. Oh, there she is. Bharti, could you turn on your video and say hello so people can see you?
Hi, sorry everybody, I was on the wrong link. Marcus and Neil might be still there, so someone may want to send them the right link. Thanks. Hi everybody, it's good to see you all. Happy New Year to you. Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I'm Bharti Wahi, and I'm now the Deputy Assistant Commissioner at Human Services and the Children and Family Services, and I'm so excited to be part of the team, and but glad to continue to remain working with all of you on economic expansion for all of our children, youth, families, and communities. So great to see you, and sorry to be running behind.
No problem. Thank you, Bharti. And as you've all gotten to know Bharti on phase 1 of the project here, obviously excited to have her deep commitment to children across the state of Minnesota engaged now in state government. I also wanted to mention that my good friend Penny Wheeler, of course, has changed her role in the community, no longer in charge of the massive Ohlina health system, but has agreed to stay on the council. And we're so glad that she's done that. And Penny, I don't know if you want to turn on a video and say hello.
Yeah, I think I'm on now, but yeah, I'm late too, Bharti, because I guess I have to navigate my own things without an assistant now, which is really scary. So thank you. I'm glad to stay with you and glad to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And since we met last, just want to share that leadership has met and decided that the skills that these two women bring from their previous backgrounds are so still critical to the work of this council that we've decided that they should stay on the council and finish the work with us in phase 2. And we're so glad that they've both agreed to do that. And with that, off to you, Mr. Paul Williams.
Well, thank you, and congratulations, Bharti, and congratulations, Penny, and thank you both for sticking with the work here in phase 2. And I hope everybody had just a moment to breathe here over the holidays. I kind of sort of did, and it feels like 2022 is off to an incredible start, to say the least. But I just want to say just a word about the phase 1 work. I was amazed at how many people kind of caught wind of that and heard about that and called about it. I've had I've got a call later on today of folks who want to just hear, well, what was the council thinking? And folks in particular areas. Jeff, I know, did a session with the governor, and I think I think the commissioners would agree that the governor and lieutenant governor really valued this work and recognized how hard everybody worked and how quickly we worked and how valuable that insight has been to them. And I know it's already kind of in the mix in terms of their thinking as they approach the upcoming sessions. So just another word of just a bravo for some good, quick work in that first phase. And I know it was an imperfect science, kind of trying to pull it all together and get everybody's input and hear from a wide range of folks. But I thought we did a really good job in a short, 8-week period, basically. So thank you for that, and know that your work is matters and is already making an impact. And in fact, it's setting us up for phase 2. So I think we're going to share a couple of slides here, just in terms of our agenda today. Does somebody have control of the slides? I hope so. It's not me.
Yes, we are bringing them up right now.
All right. So just real quickly, we're gonna spend some time, just kind of reviewing briefly kind of feedback from our closing session. We're gonna just kind of review some of our themes and guiding principles, talk about kind of headlines a little bit as kind of a way to get our creative juices flowing shortly here. And talk about kind of visualizing the future. So, I mean, a big part of this is we're now in the long-term, right, part of the conversation. So what does, the future economic expansion of Minnesota look like, depend on? What are the big things that need to be in place? I think this is almost the harder part of the conversation. It's not necessarily about a specific dollar amount or a specific budget strategy, but it's much more about kind of that longer term vision. And I think a lot of the things that we've talked about, certainly in our 8 themes and priorities and the multiple ideas and priorities that we put together, I think we already have touched on a number of those longer term strategic issues, but this phase really is focused on going deeper and thinking more broadly and I think more systemically. So we're going to spend a bit of time today on visualizing our future, thinking about long-term vision, and then we'll close out. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of just reflections from our November 15th meeting, our final meeting before we presented to the governor, we just had some conversation about what is it that we need to be thinking about as we approach this second phase in terms of final product. We talked about wanting to round out the ideas from phase 1, kind of looking more long-term for strategy and vision in 10 years. We talked about, obviously, the importance of focusing on equity, not wanting to lose that. That's critical. Thinking transformatively, and then thinking about kind of alignment of systems to strengthen economic indicators. In terms of process and engagement, we wanted to continue to hear directly from communities. We want to continue to look at perhaps what has been successful across the nation, not just locally or here in the Twin Cities, and kind of take the opportunity to dive more deeply into particular topics: entrepreneurship, new business, kind of some intersectional issues, childcare, youth engagement, mental health. Again, mental health was something that we knew was cutting across a number of different areas: education, workforce, and in particular thinking about kind of the caring professions, particularly healthcare, childcare, nursing, so forth. So mental health and so forth. So just a shout out again to our folks working in our care systems. Huge heavy lifting going on right now. I mean, literally the heaviest that we've seen, during the entire pandemic. So just a shout out to those folks, doing some heavy lifting for us right now. In terms of meeting logistics, we talked about wanting to get clearer up ahead of time about kind of the process that we're going to be in. We want to take some time, and we will over the next couple of meetings take some time to kind of sketch out and have everybody really kind of understand and be on board and help to shape what the process is going to look like here going forward. Want to be kind of clearer about purpose and expectations of each of our meetings. We talked about a variety of different kind of meeting cadences. I think what we've settled on is meeting every other week, which gives both the staff and the council members, I think, a little bit more time to breathe. Even at that, if we think about now through June, basically, we're really only talking, about maybe, 10, 12 meetings overall, kind of on the whole, which isn't necessarily a lot when you really start divvying up those meetings and the number of folks that we're going to want to hear. Thinking about, we may form some subgroups or committees, or just kind of working teams. That kind of depends on where and how our conversations go. But let's make sure that we kind of build buy-in and ownership kind of across those groups. So all of that will get fleshed out here in the coming next couple of meetings. You can go to the next slide. Just a reminder, in terms of our phase 2 deliverable. What's our final product? And literally, this comes from our kind of our charge from the governor. By June 30th, submit a long-term roadmap for systemic change in the public, private, nonprofit sectors that will achieve a more equitable, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient Minnesota economy, and specifically a charge to solicit, receive, and respond to feedback from workers, families, and communities that are representative of Minnesota and our administration's priorities for equity and inclusion. I think we're off to a good start with that in phase 1. We want to continue that in phase 2, and I'm excited to continue to hear from folks. I thought actually our panels and our discussions and our follow-up discussions with the small groups, I actually thought was a really good process, even though, again, it was such a short time period that we had. So that's our phase 2 deliverable. Again, that's our charge. If you can go to the next slide. I like this slide because it's a little bit more visual and you can't see it. The themes and ideas, the 8 themes and ideas is what would be in those boxes to the left, the phase 1 themes and ideas. But again, this first portion of our work is about vision. Where do we want to be in 10 years? What does it mean to have a more equitable, inclusive, sustainable, resilient Minnesota? And looking at kind of intersectional economic buckets, kind of taking those themes, translating that into a longer term vision, moving in then to, and I'm excited about that, and then moving into action plan and timeline. I think this is the heavier lifting. This is going to be the harder part, actually, is how do we get there? And there are lots of paths, I'm guessing, to kind of getting there. What does the timeline look like? What are the levers that need to be moved for economic success? I think that's going to take up the bulk of our time and energy, and that's where we'll want to kind of be reaching out to get a range of ideas from outside stakeholders and perspectives, and then kind of outcomes. How will we know we're successful, and what will the action plan achieve in terms of outcomes? We'll fill in again these meeting details here in the next couple of meetings in terms of how we go about this, but this is kind of the overall components, we think, of getting to our final set of deliverables. And if you can move to the next slide, just a reminder of our guiding principles. I think our guiding principles still are relevant. I think we may, decide at some point that are there some additional principles that we need to add. But again, our charge in this second phase isn't about one-time monies, but certainly the financial picture at the state right now is relevant, both in terms of significant surplus and in terms of significant federal dollars continuing to come in really over the next 2 to 3 years. It's both. Money may not be the issue, actually. I think strategy is the issue, and implementation, I think, is the issue. But certainly money matters, and the financial picture at the state and at local governments will be important in all of this. Driving equitable outcomes for those who face systemic barriers. I know we had some different perspectives on what does that really mean, but equity, I think, remains, racial equity in particular, remains, I think, a priority in these conversations. We want to continue to think about how do we amplify and scale programs that work, right? Particularly those that are rooted in communities. Innovation that enhances impact, long-term systemic changes, thinking about addressing multiple needs are all principles that we identified before that I think we just want to kind of keep kind of in front of us. So I think, is that the end of the slides that I was going to cover? I think that's the 8 themes there. And our top priorities, again, just a reminder, can you go back just to the wheel there, just because I think it's such a pretty picture. I love the way that this came out visually. Just talking about those 8 kind of themes. And if you go to the next slide, in more in the priority, our top 5 priorities around producing new affordable housing, workforce skilling, reskilling, upskilling, small business ecosystem within BIPOC communities, ensuring broadband access and investments in opportunity youth. So those were our top 5 priorities. And we'll go to the next slide. So I think I'm going to turn it back to Amy.
Yep, Paul, that's right. So now at this point of the conversation, this is Amy. Liz and I will be facilitating the bulk of our time together for the rest of the meeting today so that Paul and Jeff can really dive in and participate as you're looking at creating a vision for phase 2. And to kick us off, to get us kind of embedded in what we're talking about, we have an activity around creating a news headline. It's now 2032. The state is being nationally recognized as having an equitable, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient Minnesota economy. And we'd like to go around and hear from everyone, what does that headline read? If we've really done all of the work that we can do around the Economic Council in 10 years, what will that look like? And we have an example headline. In the wake of the tumultuous events of 2020 to 2021, Minnesota faced several economic challenges and they met the moment. They built an economy that works for everyone, made substantial strides on racial equity, and retooled industry to shape the next chapter of the Minnesota economy. And so we'd like to go around and hear from everyone, just kind of like we did at phase 1 when we kicked off and everybody shared their priorities. What is your headline for 2032? And I'll just go ahead and look at the chat and kind of go in order of names. And so Brenda, if you'd be willing to kick us off, we'll start with you and then go to Commissioner Grove, Commissioner Harpstead, Jeff, and then Jody.
Well, okay. Mine isn't quite as long as that other one, but Minnesota's Healthcare Career Pathways program serves as a national model on how to build an inclusive workforce throughout technical and professional roles in the healthcare systems, and addresses, recruitment, and that's as far as I got. So I'm gonna stop there.
That's great. Thank you for sharing.
That's great. I love it. Admittedly, I wrote the example headline, so I'm just going to point to that as my example here. But I think speaking of this as an inflection point and that we meet the moment that we face right now, in particular as it relates to making an economy that works for everyone, making substantial strides in racial equity, and retooling our industry to meet the next chapter of the Minnesota economy, kind of strikes at a bunch of the themes I think we've talked about here, and eager to hear other ideas too.
Thank you, Commissioner. And then Commissioner Harpstead, Jeff, Jody, and then Joe.
Thank you. My headline says that Minnesota has built on its signature strength since the pandemic to build a strong economy and to care for all Minnesotans.
Mine is state's robust, multifaceted economy powered by inclusion of all Minnesotans, and kind of cheat ahead and looking at some of the goals that we're going to talk about later. I mean, I just feel we need to be addressing opportunity gaps in our state, We need to attract and retain talent and enterprises, and we need to amplify skills needed for the changing economy.
Was I next?
Well, go ahead, Joe, and then let's hear from
I didn't think I was. That's why I was waiting.
Let's hear from you, Joe, since you're off mic, and then we'll go to Jody and then Neil.
Okay, mine wasn't as long as some of the others. I was trying to stay at a sentence and have been thinking about other sentences now to add to it, but mine was Minnesota's inclusive economy is proof that a rising tide lifts all boats, and make sure that there's enough bounty for everyone to eat. Mine was more of a headline than it was bringing in all of the other aspects of it, so I took it as a headline. Like, I would read that.
It's great. There's no wrong answers, so thank you.
And I look for my colleague Jody and Jody for which of us. So there are times where I take a step back on the, I'm on spot for something, or nope, it's the other Jody. So I think you're meaning me, Amy, at this point. Mine was more of the, similar to Joe, was the actual just headline on a Minnesota becomes benchmark after state achieves X% of improvement and racial equity, job creation, and influx of talent in the last, and then I had such period of time. But that it's a headlight that produces the results, not this intention.
So I'm up. My headline is more Americans move to Minnesota than any other state. Because if that's it. It's short enough to actually be a headline. The reason I like that is because people would be voting with their feet. If we actually make this a great place for families, and we make this a great place for business and entrepreneurship, and there are lots of jobs, and there's affordable housing, I mean, it touches everything. And there's a competition among the states for talent. And so, anyway, that captures a lot in a few words is what I liked about it.
Thanks, Neil. Let's hear from Juhi, Marcus, and then Nanoko.
Good afternoon. Apologies for being late, and I did not do my homework. So bad participant, but I'll say hi to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Juhi. If you decide to pop in a headline in the chat later too, we'll capture that. So thank you. Let's turn it over to Marcus, Nanoko, and then Paul.
Okay, get your headlines ready, folks. Minnesota, a state where opportunities are created, people are cared for, and the economy works for everyone. Period. Exclamation point, actually.
Mine is Minnesota is a state of generosity and abundance, and it's first in the country where 100% surveyed throughout the state feel safe, healthy, and have access to basic human rights. And then there's a sub headline that says all direct service nonprofits in Minnesota sunsets as their visions and goals have been actualized in real life.
Thanks, Nanoko. Over to you, Paul, and then we'll go to Commissioner Robertson.
I utterly failed at this assignment, and what I had was several bullets, and they focus on things that we created. We created voice and authentic inclusion. We institutionalized practices. We took risks. We tied BIPOC investments in communities of color to the broader economic growth of the state. Joe, it's a little bit of a slight addition to what you were saying, and we made the case that investments in our more marginalized communities, in fact, drive broader statewide growth. So that's a series of bullets. It's a very bad headline, but it's what was on my mind.
Thanks, Paul. It was a number of headlines.
Yes.
Right. Over to you, Commissioner Robertson, and then Scott, and then Tracy.
Okay, I took the simple route. Minnesota meets the challenge to create a workforce that works for all.
Very concise. I'm going to go. Minnesota made unprecedented investments in infrastructure and entrepreneurship to open its economy to all. Now it leads the nation.
I think it's my turn, and I did a little research because I'm a nerd, and my headline reads, Aiming High, Minnesota now ranks #1 in the U.S. News and World Report 2032 Equality Rankings. And I will tell you all that we currently rank 30th in the nation, which I think is horrible. And we have some of the worst, or we are way down at the bottom of the barrel in terms of employment gap by race and employment gap by disability. So if we're going to get to #1, we're going to have to fix those issues.
Thank you, Tracy. Let's hear from Barty and then Penny.
Mine was fairly short. I was like, Minnesota children, youth, communities thrive. And then there's sort of like a colon. And then I was like, Minnesota eliminates disparities in income, home ownership, and economic security across race, geographic location, gender, and ability. That was it.
Yeah, mine was short as well. It's starts with all thrive, : Minnesota leads on outcomes that matter most.
Thank you. And Juhi has added in her headline. Thanks for that. I'll just read it quickly. Minnesota flipped the script and gone from worst to first in equitable economy. Nothing is impossible. And did anybody get missed at all? I think we've got all the council members. Okay. All right, so what are we going to do with the rest of our time together? I've got a couple slides here about process to kind of explain the why behind what we're doing and the steps that we'll take. So what we're going to do is spend a few minutes actually quietly, individually brainstorming the answer to the question, what do we want to see in place in 10 years as a result of our actions? And we'll spend 5 minutes doing that. And then we'll go into small groups and we'll share what we've come up with in these very small groups with each other. And in those groups, we're going to take about 6 to 8 of the goals that you've brainstormed, and we'll bring them back to the large group, and then we'll actually affinity map. So think like if we were in a room together, it would be Post-it notes that we would be clustering, but we're going to do this in Google Slides, which I did put in the chat a link to the Google Slides. I'll describe that a little bit more in a minute, but you can go ahead and pop in there if you'd like to. And then after that, we'll give those clusters of goals a name that represents the practical vision that we're working toward. And so why are we using this process? It's participatory, it's consensus building, and it's going to create this structure for the phase 2 roadmap. And we think that council engagement in this process will really help in driving future meeting agendas and engagement with the stakeholders that we need to meet with. And so at the end of our meeting today, we'll have 4 to 7 practical vision statements that will capture the goals that you've all brainstormed, that you've come to some consensus on. The statements will be shared, intentional, inspiring, and they'll be solid drafts. We're going to keep refining these as we engage with stakeholders. So if we don't have it perfect today, that's okay. We want to have something that's a really solid foundation for us to build off of during phase 2. And then on the 31st, when we come back together, we'll actually take those vision statements and we're going to dive in and ask the question, where does this fit in the public, private, or nonprofit sector? Where are there information gaps? What other information do we need to know to really understand this and help figure out how do we create a roadmap for how to get there? And then who do we need to hear from? And for each of those people, the population or sector, what do we hope to learn and how should we best engage with them? Whether it's having them come to one of our council meetings, or maybe it makes sense for the council to go out and do some type of engagement safely, of course. And then this will create that framework for the roadmap during phase 2. Any questions about process before we dive in? It will make sense as we go along. I'll promise you that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm just gonna kind of get ourselves centered, and then I'll time us for 5 minutes while we think on our own quietly. Kind of weird to be quiet in a council meeting, but just to make sure everybody's able to engage with this. And I know you've all been thinking about this in preparation for the meeting. But what do you see in 10 years? What needs to be our instructional manual to guide Minnesota over the next 10 years? Think long term, think beyond funding. What partnerships or policies do we need in place? What goals do we need to work toward? What actions must we take? And so I will set a timer for 5 minutes. And so go ahead and jot down the ideas that you have around goals of what we want to see in templates as a result of our actions. And try to use concrete descriptive language. You've already done that with your headlines. And I'll keep track. Time. All right, it's been 5 minutes, and I'm sure you still have ideas that you're coming up with. So just remember that this isn't the last time you'll have to think about this to feed into the roadmap. What we're going to do now is you're going to take the ideas you came up with, the goals that you brainstormed, and we're going to go into small groups. Liz, if you want to move to the slide 15. In your small groups, you're going to share that list that you came up with, your top ideas from that list, and then you'll decide on 6 to 8 goals that you want to bring back to the large group. Remembering that there are 5 small groups, and so there will be ideas coming from all of these groups, and so hopefully there will be a diverse group of ideas that you all come up with. And I'm just going to show you briefly, Liz, if you want to go to slide 16. There is a slide for each breakout room. And so you can click on the link for the Google Slides. And if you're in breakout room 1, you go ahead and write your goal in those boxes. And that'll help us because then we're going to copy them back over to do this infinity map activity on Google Slides, kind of taking the place, like I said, of a wall with sticky notes. Any questions before we go into breakouts? And then Liz and I actually are going to pop into each of the rooms just to make sure everybody's on track. So I think, Angie, if you want to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms, we're going to spend 15 minutes, but if it's taking longer, we'll add more time just to make sure that you have enough time to kind of talk through your goals and decide on the ones you want to bring back.
This is Eric. I'm just popping in to let you know that, yeah, we got 15 minutes. I'll pop in again if they are running behind. So if you have more time. Thank you. Just a heads up, they're coming back in a minute.
I think most people are back. How did it go?
Well,
Can you let us know that you successfully got the breakout downloads from everybody? I see mine on my screen, but I can't tell. You have it too then?
Yes. Yep. It looks like we've got everybody's. What we're going to do now is do some affinity mapping on slide 22. And we can share the screen, but something that I would suggest, just because this particular slide in the affinity mapping, if we share the screen, it's really hard to read. And so if you use the link instead, it's a bit more accessible. And I'll copy the link into the chat again, just in case anybody needs it. Is slide 22 that we're on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through a few of the boxes. I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions about the ideas, just to get clarity if we need clarity on them. And then I'm going to ask you if you see any that kind of fit together, that have some similar intent, because we're going to try to categorize them into somewhere between 4 to 7 clusters of goals. So I have dramatic growth in BIPOC-owned businesses, shared definition of health and community health, strong sense of Minnesota's identity, problem-solving capital, caring profession support, strengthen core assets, housing, childcare, medical, connectivity, talent influx and internal development versus drain, a tax structure that reflects our shared values, education is good in North Minneapolis as Edina, net immigration to state, rural and urban, and robust set of basic rights across the state. And let's start with those. Any questions about those ideas? Juhi, did you have a question? I see you lit up, and I'll just kind of watch for that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am curious. Could you restate the process that we're in right now? I apologize.
No worries at all. What we're doing is going through all the ideas, and then we're going to try to cluster them into similar intent or theme. So it's affinity mapping. It'd be a lot easier if we had Post-it notes on a wall, but we've got a virtual wall right now and virtual Post-it notes.
And I'm sorry, Amy, could you tell us again how to get to what you're reading?
Absolutely. So if you go into the chat, I just put a link into the Google Slides, and we are on slide 22. And there's just a ton of information in this slide. And it's the easiest way to see it is to actually click on the link than to have us share the screen, because the font just is so small if I project it into Teams.
Thanks.
And so what I'm asking is if there's questions about the ideas that you see, or if you see ideas that have some similar intent. And as we start to kind of group these, it'll get easier. Liz, do we have all of the ideas over here?
I think we need just one more set of ideas in here, but we're close.
Okay, sounds good. And is somebody making the ideas purple that are purple?
Yep, it's me, Amy.
Okay. Thanks.
The purple, that's my first clump, so.
Of similar? Okay. Do folks agree? Dramatic growth in BIPOC-owned businesses, increased business growth, entrepreneurship, BIPOC women and veteran, intentional strategy for business-owned, BIPOC-owned businesses. Those all make sense? I like it. Any other similarities that you see?
Amy, I heard you read one that was, I can't see the full screen for some reason, but that was like net migration into Minnesota. And I know in group 4, we had one about population growth. And so I'm just wondering if anybody sees, yeah, there's one that says Minnesota #1 for population growth. It looks to me like it's kind of up and to the left of the one that says net in migration to the state.
Oh, yep, I see it. I will move that over.
There's one on the bottom too. It's talent influx and internal development versus drain. It's kind of similar.
And
Go ahead, Paul.
This is Paul. We had one that just talked about an intentional strategy for young workers, young talent in particular. So
Yep.
I think that, I don't know if it got into the actual boxes when we were adding our stuff in.
Let's see. I see intentional with education and training, specifically those left on the bench. I suppose that's not young people. I'm looking for it. Should be here. Robust system. Nope, this is childcare.
There are a couple childcare ones together, and there's a couple related to affordable housing / homelessness. There's right up above to the right, there's increased affordable housing, elimination of homelessness. Yep. And then there's also one that's towards the bottom right that says affordable housing. They might be related.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a couple childcare ones, 0 to 13. And then there's something else about childcare I'd seen as well.
All right, let's find those. Thriving public-private childcare partnerships. We have, where's the other childcare one?
There's a robust system of childcare support, 0 to 13, family supports with youth 13 to 18. It's right in the middle, right there. Yep.
Perfect.
And then there may be something of accessibility of affordable childcare and development opportunities for youth along the continuum, which is just to the right of what was highlighted in green. Those are maybe somewhat related.
That makes sense.
We have several on the education side that maybe you would group together. On the far left, it's equitable opportunities in education for birth to 24. And then, yep, there's in green. And then there was another one over to the right somewhere, I believe, for education. There.
You got those ones, Liz?
I just would, Juhi caught one that we were doing at the end of our group, but our edit got lost. So it's in that blue box that says talent influx and internal development. To get rid of the word influx and change it to upskilling.
Upskilling, got it.
Upskilling of Minnesotans. So internal. Yeah.
Amy, the other thing is I think my group said it was okay for me to add, even though we didn't necessarily have consensus, but I added something around voter rights and just ensuring that voices of the people are heard and strengthening them. It's on group 6.
I'll pull it over. We must have missed that one, huh?
I added at the end because I wasn't sure if I could.
All good. I think I copied it over. Oops.
So then would the one that's in blue of the talent and upskilling be different than population growth? Because since we pulled out influx, it seems to be more job training related than it is population.
What do folks think?
That's a good point, Phil.
Because there's several of them for talent and education training.
Yeah, it may be more of that now.
I think the bigger piece of that was just to that we, it's aggravating from a community perspective sometimes when there's an investment in attracting businesses, attracting talented individuals to Minnesota for whatever purposes. And when we have so many people that have potential talent, we have so many potential businesses or entrepreneurs that we may not be investing in. And so we just talked about that tension of focusing on an influx or migration versus really being intentional with the investments locally.
So based on that conversation, what ideas should go together?
Well, Juhi, was that more of a influx of talent that you want upskilled, or is it the existing talent we have upskilling them? One seems population based, the other one seems more like training.
Well, I think the point is the tension with the idea of influxing and migrating people here. That the desire to have more of a focus towards the existing communities with the potential talent that we need to invest in, as opposed to outsourcing it.
So this is a really, I think, good conversation, important topic. And I would hope we could spend some more time on it at some point. My sense is, and this was pre-pandemic, was it's a both and. We both need to upskill and keep every kid that we got in our schools, in our communities. We need to invest heavily in building that existing pipeline, and we need to desperately grab every worker we can get, particularly young workers from outstate, from international communities. So it's a both and the numbers would tell us that we actually need both of those. That's my understanding, at least.
That stool, when we talk about workforce, the third leg of that stool is automation. You either upskill the folks you have internally, you bring people inside of the state, or you automate a process. I mean, to me, those are kind of the three ways to look at your workforce challenge in the broadest possible sense that might make sense. They're different approaches, but they're kind of under the same thesis, Paul, to your point. And I agree, they're totally both and.
Yeah, and we talked about that. I was with Johi and Jeff. We talked about that and trying to remember, even I couldn't go back fast enough to my notes, the demographers comment at I think one of our very first meetings was, to your point, Paul, it isn't even up for question that it's an either or. We have to have both, because we don't have enough from a population basis here. So it has to be both. And I think Commissioner Grovier, thank you for reminding us of the automated componentry of that, which again, we talked about how much of this also starts to create this flywheel. So we didn't want it to just be influx, but that upskilling also was maybe where it blends.
Can I just add? I think that it'd be very difficult to make Minnesota an attractive place for people to want to move here if we are not simultaneously making it an attractive place for people who do live here. Like, I actually think these two things are two sides of the same coin. And so I don't see a tension. I mean, I'm agreeing with that it is both and, but I think you end up having to do both together if you're going to do either of them successfully.
Can we go back to slide? Let's see. We had multimodal transportation system, and then I saw a equitable access to infrastructure. I didn't know if that was kind of the same token or if it was different infrastructure, including drinking water and everything. But if it was access to, the infrastructure for transportation, those would be similar.
In our group, we did the equitable access to infrastructure, and it started with broadband, but we wanted to make sure that it was encompassing of all things infrastructure in our communities.
So move the multimodal into this sort of pink group here.
I don't think those. I think that it would be maybe the other way, but I don't know that a multimodal transportation system would tie. I mean, it certainly at some level could tie into the others, but.
So equitable access to infrastructure and multimodal transportation system might be on their own, and in a new category, I should say.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I don't know how others feel.
Let me just look at that whole. So we got barriers to economic inclusion. We have health disparities, basic rights.
I think
I feel like those. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, vibrant economic environment that creates jobs for all and evolution of industry development. Tie that in with focus on livable wages.
Let's see.
Actually, I had a question about livable wage and whether the group that put it in was thinking about any particular job categories where we needed livable wage.
Yeah,
I'm wondering if it overlaps with our caring profession box.
Our group talked about the need for the essential workforce to, that the positions that are represented in those categories that we've determined to be essential, that if the work is essential, then it is critical that those jobs individually and collectively pay a wage rate equal to or greater than the family sustaining wage rate, because it's hard to really balance that, and a lot of that discussion has come up in a number of work groups that I've participated in the last year. And it's like, if the jobs themselves are essential and critical, then they should pay a wage rate that will allow individuals to support their families.
So kind of a Venn diagram overlap with the caring professions, but not the same.
Not the same, but looking at all the essential workforce.
Thank you.
All right. And so based on that, are folks comfortable with this focus on livable wage and vibrant economic environment that create jobs for all in evolution of industry development being together? Okay. So we have some stragglers out here. I'll read some of them and let's see if they belong in any of these existing groups or if there's some new groups. We have a strong sense of Minnesota's identity, problem-solving capital, essential workforce that reflects family sustainable wage. Actually, I think we'll pop that into this category here. Looks like Liz is working on that. Evergreen Fund sustained investment by state, voter rights protected and strengthened, all voices represented. Depth of capacity exists within disenfranchised communities. Intentional community engagement exists across systems and institutions. A fully robust economy, a tax structure that reflects our shared values. Safe, healthy communities of choice exist across the state, urban and rural. Protect Minnesota's natural environment. Equitable and affordable quality healthcare, decreasing preventable deaths and acute behavioral health crisis. Shared definition of health and community health, and caring profession support. So any of those that aren't sort of clustered already that belong in an existing cluster, or do you see any new relationships?
What was the discussion around Evergreen Fund? Was that obviously dollars, but was it meant for anything specific, infrastructure or jobs?
Ms. Jody, I brought it up just as again, with that 10-year view that we get out of, my hope is that, like some other states, Tennessee and a few others, that the Evergreen Fund is much larger, much more significant. It moves not only inclusive of grants, but moves all the way through actual investment in companies of, say, what might be viewed as sizable, maybe a 5 million, but that it also adheres with some of the objectives that we've had established already under Launch Minnesota, 60% target towards BIPOC, women, vets, the inclusion efforts, the equity efforts that we've already started to establish in the work of Launch Minnesota continue on in that. So I didn't drill down into the measured how, but I really wanted to put a stake in the ground around the need for a much more sustaining source of state-based investment in the entrepreneurial ecosystem than what we have now.
Okay.
Thanks for clarifying. Other new relationships with the few we have left. Marty, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know that, so I'm a little bit, okay, sorry, I'm going to switch back to the Google Doc because that is just so small. So I don't know if this is like pink or like whatever, there's like elimination of health disparities, geography, cultural, indigenous, right? And then there's like equitable, affordable healthcare. I know that there's something here more specific to behavioral health. So I'm just thinking about red or salmon and pink, and maybe just sort of like how those groupings are. One thing I just wanted to highlight, and our group talked a little bit about how the system itself can create the barrier, right? So if we that one goal, and it could be a goal, it can also be a strategy, right? Sort of how can we also create systems that are not getting in the way? And I think Tracy had a really lovely example. Tracy, would you be willing to share that example?
I will. And Commissioner Grove, you might have to help me if I get this wrong, but I was just saying that we had a Minnesota Job Skills Partnership Board conversation kind of between the time we finished up phase 1 and this beginning of phase 2. And one of the things that came up was that I think last year there was some pressure that DEED was putting on the legislature to try to look at things and language, for example, incumbent worker training, where that's in law that we allocate dollars to that. But at the same time, it's probably worth reviewing, because if you only train incumbent workers, industries where there's not diversity and some people have been excluded from the industry, they never get to have access to that training because they're not in the industry. And so we were talking about that really a complete review of everything needs to look at language and the way that we describe and tackle things to make sure that we're not putting into law things that keep some people out of, equity or access to what others have. So I don't know. I didn't describe that very good. Well, Commissioner Grove, jump in if you.
Tracy, I think Tracy did a great job of thinking about how a definition, right? The word incumbent creates both, it narrows the universe of possibility in this context, right? And I think thinking about how systems, whether it might be in workforce development or others, right? Like how the system itself sometimes narrows or restricts the ability to actually move to a more inclusive way of thinking about the system itself, how people are participating in the system, who gets help or who doesn't, right? So that's just one of the things I just wanted to highlight, which is a little bit different than sort of thinking about health disparities, although that might be the natural consequence of something like that, right? Or something. But we just wanted to hold that, that a goal has to be, really thinking about the way in which the system itself is preventing the very things that we were talking about. And so that was one piece that we were, how we were thinking about it or holding it.
Thanks, Barty. Nanoko, I see you have your hand up, and then Commissioner Grove.
I'm sorry, I don't know how to turn this down. I think I have to also be kind of constantly reminded of the fact that there are still people and communities are missing, their voices are missing at this particular table. And as we are determining what should be prioritized in terms of an equitable economy, as part, I really like the idea of a shared common language. Like, I think we're all going to come, I think we have some shared understanding and values in terms of where we want to go. How we get there, we might disagree on. But I just feel like every single time folks talk about equity or folks talk about inclusion, I always wonder, like, how are you defining it? And I know this isn't really helping in terms of grouping right now, but just in terms of like overarching common definition, this is how we are defining. I lost a little box there. I think that's also important. And I don't know, I think this is related, but grouped, but it seems very different. But I also think that, having everybody have a voice in our electoral system will also affect a tax structure that reflects our shared values. Like, what does it mean to have a shared value when a lot of folks' voices are not represented in our legislature or Congress? So I just wanted to point that out.
Thanks, Nanoko. I'll go ahead, Commissioner, and then Commissioner Harpstead after that.
I think that's a great point. And one of the things that Nanoko and Scott and I talked about in our group was the idea of, everyone loves the phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but Nanoko pointed out some people don't even have boots. So like, what is the sort of basic set of things, sort of the Minnesota promise, if you will, that every citizen sort of gets when they're here? And how does that foundation look stronger than anywhere else? And then from there, there's all kinds of competition and, the market plays out and everything like that. But I guess the salmon and red colored categories generally, it's not just about healthcare, but about kind of this, as Scott defined it, kind of a basic bill of rights for Minnesotans. upon which you operate, and from there you can succeed on your merits. And I think it gets a little bit to Tracy's point too.
Thanks, Commissioner. We'll turn it to Commissioner Harpstead and then Marcus.
Yep, I think your caring profession support belongs up in your healthcare area. That's where it really, you had it there before, and that's where it belongs. And it's interesting that you're sort of blending healthcare with basic rights and things. It goes a little bit beyond healthcare, but generally we're talking healthcare and community supports. I'd make it red if I were you.
Yeah, and just kind of to that point, we use equitable and affordable in a lot of our statements, but I see that as we're looking at and the discussion that we're having, there's like this whole bucket around how equity is defined in the state and how we get there collectively, which, you know, addresses the disparities, addresses like these big overarching themes of how we think about equity. But then there's a very specific, we need affordable health care for everyone. We need to focus on the caring profession and ensuring that we're, you know, leveling up, you know, the pay and, you know, career pathing for folks in that space, as well as the actual elimination of health disparities. So like there's the philosophy of how we think about it and the actual behavior of actually delivering on it. So making sure we address, not clumping those things together, but addressing those two separately.
Marcus, do you suggest dividing out existing cluster of ideas?
Yeah, well, looking at just kind of the salmon red areas, like I think you need to have like, you know, and how we can reword it. We put equitable and affordable health care, but like, and it wasn't just about decreasing preventable deaths. We actually had 9, and we brought, you know, the preventable deaths around acute behavioral health crisis into the overarching bucket of affordable healthcare and quality healthcare. So then the other pieces, the caring profession was like a blend between healthcare itself, but then also like the jobs part of it as well. So, but we wanted to make sure that there was a you know, a concerted effort around who's actually providing the support for that affordable and quality healthcare, and making sure that they're not left out of this, of any of these plans. And then I think the areas where eliminate, you know, barriers and disparities and all things equitable, I think that kind of starts to get to how we actually define equity and how we define kind of what we want in that space, kind of to what Nanoko was talking about. And like who gets to define that and how we go about that. I think there's like, that's the bigger bucket around equity and inclusion. Let me see. Shared definition of health, I also think goes to equitable, affordable healthcare. I'm probably getting a little too into the weeds now, but like if anyone else has some thoughts around that, that's kind of where my head was.
No, I think now is the time to kind of speak to this. One thing to remember, all of these are in a relationship together because you answered the same question, but setting up what these sort of clusters are right now is going to help us so much, because once we have them clustered, you're going to kind of name what the intent is and then start diving in and talking about what information we need and who we need to talk to. And so we don't want to lose a really good idea just clumping it in with another one. So thanks for helping us walk through that. Do you think that captures it right, how we moved them around, Marcus?
Yeah. I mean, there's I was looking at the eliminating health disparities, but I think it goes beyond healthcare. So I think I would keep it where it's at.
Okay. Sounds good. Any other thoughts about these ones down here on our bottom right corner? Depth of capacity exists within disenfranchised community, evergreen fund, sustained investment by state, intentional community engagement exists across systems and institutions, protect Minnesota's natural environment, and strong sense of Minnesota's identity, problem-solving capital, or any other shifts that you think we need to make?
Paul, what was the comment you made about the depth of capacity? What was that in relation to?
Well, yeah, and not surprisingly, I'm the outlier here, and I can claim authorship of a couple of these. When I think 10 years out, again, to me, and this is part of my more tactical orientation, when we have capacity, particularly in disenfranchised communities, and a sense of self-agency, right? And a sense of, I have the institutions, the voice, the capacity to solve stuff for my own community. When that capacity exists 10 years from now, a lot of other things I think starts to resolve itself, right? When communities have the ability to, and the capacity and the institutions, right, to take care of their own stuff and to really have a sense of self and self-determination. That's one piece. The intentional community engagement exists across systems and institutions. That is a belief that I shared that, and I know others do that. That's community engagement, right? In all that we do, right? When DEED is putting together its new, funding programs, and I know they do a lot of outreach already, for example, or using community members as decision makers, right, around funding allocations. When PPL at Lake and Nicollet is rebuilding the Wells Fargo site, we're doing that with a ton of community engagement, right, around what should go here and what is my long-term stake in what's being built here. When that kind of community engagement capacity exists across all institutions 10 years from now, I think we have a different kind of community and citizen engagement that matters and creates many of the very outcomes that are pointed out in other parts of this chart. So those are tactics. Those are kind of strategies, or they're all, I don't know what you would call them, but they're tools, right? They're not necessarily outcomes in and of themselves.
Well, could the depth
go ahead.
Could the depth of capacity go over with the Lavender, the BIPOC business area? I mean, Nanoka reminds us it's not just business that drives the world. I mean, it seems like, that cluster did focus on business, but it's really more of, okay, let's build resources within communities.
I'd almost put them up though, like the whole conversation around equity. Like, how do you solve for equity? Like, you look to the people that is most impacted, right?
Yeah, and again, it's something. It certainly does relate very much to that notion of economic development, entrepreneurship, and so forth. But to me, again, having strong capacity in communities of color and disenfranchised communities around childcare, around human services, around business development, all are examples of that same capacity kind of existing, or places where it can manifest itself.
Paul, where do you think that this idea fits? Would you put them, as looks like Marcus suggested, up here in this sort of salmon color?
It certainly could, yes.
Right.
And those, again, are some broader kind of system-wide ideas up there, shared definitions. Again, it's broader than just healthcare, but yeah, for now it can sit up there. Again, I'm not falling on my sword on this by any means, just explaining it.
All good. Any other thoughts maybe about the intentional community engagement goal, where that might fit?
Well, and maybe this gets to a little bit of Paul's point. There's something about the how, right? And I hear you, Paul, because there's something about equitable process that leads to equitable outcome. And if you do not, I don't care what you intend, if you cannot engage in that in the process, right, of it, you will not get there, right? And they are so intricately tied that it is hard to suss them out into like what is a strategy versus what is the end result, because they are so tied. And we don't see great examples at times of equitable process, right? Which also means we sometimes don't see equitable outcomes either. So I hear your challenge in it, because I am struggling in that same place of it is its thing, and it is also it is a thing, and it is also the way in which the thing should get done so that other thing can happen. And I just want to acknowledge your challenge because I'm fully living in that space as well.
Yeah, thank you. You really captured that well, Barty. Much better than I did. Thanks.
Is there a way in which this next phase, as we get to the action and the house stuff, can sort of incorporate that exact, like maybe we really root it there. Small other passing comment just on the Minnesota's identity. I think we can put that in with net migration and sort of a talent attraction. I think the thinking there that came out of our group was just how to define Minnesota to the outside world in a way that's attractive. So I would slide that over to kind of a darkerish blue on the migration front.
Perfect, thank you. Do folks think the intentional community engagement maybe goes through with this all things equitable top of the list for best in class? One seems like a goal and the other seems like the tactic on how to get there.
That certainly would be fine with me, and I think Steve's suggestion is a good one. Actually, that some of the hows may be more about the next part of the discussion. And
oh yeah,
yeah,
for sure. This is just the foundational first step. So you're going to be coming back to these in the next meeting and in phase 2. Tracy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, my comment is just on protecting Minnesota's natural environment. I think one important thing about that. Fully support the idea of having that be in here as a goal, but Minnesota's natural environment and our natural resources are a huge part of our economy as well in Minnesota. And so whether that be the tourism economy, but we also have mining and forestry and pulp and paper that all depend on the natural resources of our state. And so I don't know, I just feel like there's something not only about protecting our natural environment, but also doing what we can to safely leverage our environment and our natural resources, especially in greater Minnesota where it's a huge part of the economy. Even agriculture is part of that. We got to protect what we have.
Do you see a spot that belongs, or does it kind of stand on?
No, I think that those areas about the environment and our natural resources as being an important part of our economy is probably missing from there, but that they go together because we want to protect that for lots of reasons, but we also want to be able to maximize and leverage our environment and our resources for the economy.
Thanks, Tracy. Joe, it looks like you have your hand up, and then Scott.
Well, not to add to anybody else's because I didn't write it, but off of your part, Tracy, if it's something like protect Minnesota's natural environment while utilizing it to grow the economy, I don't know, does that fit within what we're trying to do here?
There's something kind of related, Tracy, to that one and to the darker-ish blue box around sort of economic growth that I think if we only focus on talent attraction, we're missing kind of business attraction and business growth. Like, how do the next Fortune 500s want to come and base themselves here or grow here? And it has to do with how we steward the environment. It has to do with how we access the environment. I don't know, business growth in general and business attraction is a category that I don't know if we've landed in any of these categories, but it's just a huge, huge component of economic growth and economic expansion that is vital in a very fluid economy to outcompete other states. I don't know if we've distilled it here in, anywhere in particular. I guess the bluish area is the closest, maybe, but I don't know. Maybe it's food for further thought as we refine. But I just want to name that here because I think it gets a little bit to the points just made. I think you're on mute, Amy.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I just wanted to mention that when we come back together on the 31st, we do have a prompt about is something missing from this group of ideas. So there is definitely time to add in content as you're seeing these ideas kind of come together and form bigger vision statements. Scott, did you have a comment still? And then Marcus, it looks like you do.
Yeah, I just really appreciated Tracy's words, and I feel, with respect to the environment, and I feel like if we're looking for wording, I think, like part of me with this commission, wants to put the environment out of scope. Just there's certain amount of things, protecting the environment. It's just we're gonna spend hours defining that once you use the word protect. In my mind, growing up north, it's a struggle in the Twin Cities when people use that term. Sometimes they mean, don't utilize the environment, and it's a struggle to live in harmony with the environment while also using it as a major part of your economy. When there's that viewpoint of strict protection. And so I wonder if we don't take it out of scope, I think we should choose our language really carefully. And I think it's, achieve inclusive economic expansion in a way that is sustainable with our environment or something like that. And just, I'm not trying to dismiss the entire issue, but I do think words really matter when it comes to something of that nature. And protect is just a word we'd have to discuss really a lot.
Scott, would it be helpful if we add in another idea next to this one that is about that, about sort of?
So I think, sustainably Minnesota's natural resources for economic growth is fine with me. I think it doesn't necessarily live in harmony with the word protect as some would define it, but I'd be fine with that.
Will you add that in, Liz? And I think that's helpful because then when you're coming back together, then you can kind of dive in and make sense of that, but I don't want to lose sight of it today. So I think adding that in is helpful just to trigger the memory next time around. Marcus.
Yeah, I was thinking about this Evergreen Fund and thinking about the broader picture around attracting or developing industry here. And so in our discussion, that comment around vibrant economic environment that creates jobs was really addressing like, how do we evolve the business community that we have here, and that could include developing new, whether that's attracting or developing organically. But like the idea is that, we create an environment here that's economically viable for businesses to be here to create the jobs for all, while we also think about that overall evolution. So I don't know if it's in relationship with the job or the livable wages and things like that, but I would imagine if we're going to develop businesses that they should be in relation to each other so that the jobs that are created are focusing on livable wages, and then the workers that are going to be in those jobs. So I don't have a problem with all those kind of being together, because we're going to have to tackle that in a long-term plan.
Are folks comfortable moving this over here, the evergreen in the green section for now? And Tracy, do you have a comment?
No, I'm sorry that my hand was still raised. I apologize.
That is okay. It looks like with that change, I think everything has been clustered. Do folks have any edits or anything that you want to shift right now? Again, none of this is set in stone today. This is just our starting point as we start to come up with a vision together for phase 2 and that roadmap that you'll be delivering to the governor and lieutenant governor.
What if we did strip back out that Evergreen Fund and combine it with what Commissioner Grove cited as sort of missing, just as sort of at least some commentary about attracting new businesses?
Yeah, are folks okay with that? Add in an idea, attract new businesses to Minnesota, and put that with the Evergreen Fund, sustain investment by state?
I mean, it may not make the final cut list, but at least it seems like it's a relevant topic to think about.
Sounds good. Any other adjustments that we want to make today? All right. We have 11 minutes left, and so my suggestion is that we pick up with these at our meeting on the 31st. We're already planning on starting with them. We were just going to take it a step further today and name what we were talking about, but I think we've got some really good thinking on these ideas, and it'll be a really good place for us to start on the 31st. And we'll make sure to get this back out to you so you have time to kind of think about it and digest and think about gaps, who we need to talk to, what else, who else we need to hear from around these ideas. Like I mentioned at the beginning of our time together, we really want to be able to bring in folks that you want to hear from. And so this is going to help us create those meeting agendas for the rest of phase 2. So with that, unless there's any questions about the process or this content, I will turn it back over to Paul.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Amy, especially, and the staff for kind of guiding us through this. It feels a little bit. I'm trying to keep my eye on the boxes and the colors and the people's faces at the same time. It's a little bit challenging for me, at least. So I appreciate the good work. This felt like a good discussion, and I'm glad we've got a couple of weeks before our next meeting. So I'm hopeful we can get this a little bit rounded out even and bring that back to you all prior to the next meeting when we can kind of do some more work on it and kind of defining the clusters and shaping it more into a vision. So so we'll build off of today's work, move into next week, and also again start thinking about, as these themes and clusters emerge, who do we need to hear from, and what is it that we're hoping to learn in kind of each of these areas. My guess is that as we identify our vision and kind of these cluster areas, that if you remember back to the boxes and kind of the overview of the process, that it's the how we get there, I think, is part of what we need to hear from others about. And that may be where it makes more sense to think about potential speakers and who it is that we want to hear from. So so again, good work today. Thank you for kind of sticking with it. Jeff, anything you want to add in closing?
No, it's great to see how much I feel we made a lot of progress already. Although it's also good to have a couple weeks to digest it and get back and put another effort against it before we would want to try to finalize anything or start setting future speakers or agendas.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, we're going to give you 8 minutes of your life back for that might be a first in council history. So thanks a ton to everybody for taking time, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
All done?
Yep,
Thanks,
you're all
Eric.
free to go.
Thanks, Christine. Have a great day. Thanks, Eric. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you. Bye.